Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LEC Spring Split Week number 3 overview and analysis video. Of course, we are in the final week of the regular season, technically, or the main split, whatever you want to call the round-robin stage of the LEC here in the Spring Split. We are going to be obviously jumping into the best of threes next week when we get the first two teams eliminated, so it is do or die for a couple of teams here. Not only do you want to make sure that you're in the top, 8, which I think is pretty locked in for most teams, but not all of them for sure. You also want to make sure you get as good of a seed as possible so you can get as good of a matchup as possible going into the bracket stage. There is still a lot on the line because there are so little games. Everybody is still fighting for something here, so these games really do matter, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on everything that happened in week number 3 down below. Who do you think over or underperformed? Who are you excited about coming out of this week, especially going into the best of 3 stage? Do you think anybody has generated enough momentum to become super interesting, or do you think it's a lot more of the status quo? Would love to know your thoughts. Of course, if you want to know mine, you can check out everything that's happened so far in the Spring Split up in the iCard right now. That's going to have both of the weekly recaps for week 1 and week 2, so go ahead and check that out if you are interested. Not required viewing, of course, but definitely gives you more context as to my thoughts heading into this week. But without further ado, let's jump into it. If you are new here, what we do on this channel is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game, and at the end of the week, I'll be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow for week 3. Of course, we will also be updating my personal power rankings at the end of the week, kind of giving you guys an idea of where I feel these teams are going into the best of 3 stage, going into playoffs, where I think they are in terms of power level, and the teams that I expect to be able to get out into the top 4, into that best of 5 stage. So a lot to go over in today's video. Of course, it's 15 games, so we might as well start quickly. It's going to be starting, of course, with day number 1, the 2 bottom teams in the standings, and in my power rankings going into this week, it was GIANTX taking on Rogue in our first game, and GIANTX is going to pick up the win. This isn't a particularly big upset. GX is one of those teams that I don't even think is particularly awful. I don't think their playstyle is terrible. I just think they lack talent in comparison to a lot of the other teams, and I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for them to win. Like, they have a clear playstyle. When Jackie's is able to move around on the map, they're able to win a lot of games, and, bot lane's not horrible, especially when you're going into the worst bot lane in the entire league in Comp and Zoelise, who we will obviously talk about, but this was a bit of a slaughter. Rogue is just way too passive, and even a team like GX, who's not exactly known for their aggressive 1v1 dominance in terms of these laning phases, they're still able to generate pretty consistent leads against a team like Rogue. So we'll quickly talk about it here. Player of the game is going to go to Patrick. I've been very critical of Patrick over the course of not only this split, but this year in general so far, 2024. I do not think it's been good for him. I think it's been the worst year that he has had in a long time. I've always been a bit higher on Patrick. I've been kind of a defender. I know he's not necessarily one, but it's really hard to look and point to him as the problem in a lot of these teams. Honestly, he has a very similar playstyle to someone like Teddy, in my opinion, over in the LCK. I think they're very similar players in terms of what they execute on and just where they're strong. But when Patrick does click, when he does have good games, I think he can kind of ascend to a different level of playstyle like we saw in this game here. He pulls out what I would consider to be his signature pick at this point in the Nilah. In the bot lane, he was the first Nilah in Pro, I believe, globally. Maybe it was just the LEC, but I remember when that champion first came out, he was spamming her in Pro and really has not stopped playing her since. No matter how meta or not meta she is, it's clearly a champion that he feels very comfortable on, and she can do a lot of very strong things, as we saw in this game. They funneled through the bot lane. They wanted to make sure Patrick was as strong as possible, and it very much came to fruition. Now, how much of this was, Patrick and Ignar being a lot better than they were in the first 2 weeks, and how much of it was Comp and Zoelise being clearly the worst bot lane in the LEC, I think that's really up for debate and really up for conversation, but at the very least, they were able to come out and play well. Also, Ignar did play well, but I do want to point out, Rakan is ridiculously strong. We're going to keep seeing this throughout the week. Rakan is in a state that I think he is almost undervalued in terms of how good he is. I think he is clearly the best support in the game at the moment. Him and Nautilus are both strong. I think Tom Kench is also very good, but I think it is very clear that if you get a Rakan that knows what they're doing and is able to really create a lot of these big plays across the map, it's actually almost impossible to deal with. So credit to Patrick and Ignar. I thought everybody else obviously on this team played well, though. It was an 11-3 game. It's not like anybody really played awful for GX in this one. Jackie's was everywhere on the map, even if Larson did also have pseudo pressure in the mid lane. Peach was definitely better than Marcoon in terms of the early game aggression that he was offering, and Odo was certainly better than Finn, who just had a horrible build, was playing super scared, super safe on the Ornn, and I understand that sometimes that champion has to do that, but credit to GX. This team has struggled in terms of their individual matchups. Players like Otawamne and Patrick in particular, I think, have had really bad splits leading up to this. So to see them come out in this game and at least be able to pick up a win when, they really are fighting for a top 8 spot, just because they're in the bottom 2 going into this week doesn't mean they're locked out by any means. This is a big win for them, and I think it definitely puts them in a better spot. But for Rogue, this is the worst team in the league, at least until proven otherwise. This was a pretty horrible loss for them. You just can't really go down without a fight against a team like GIANTX. That is just not a good sign. It's not a good look for you moving forward. Dead of the game is going to go to Finn for me. I think you could give this to Comp as well. I give it to Finn because that build is ridiculous. Heartsteel on Ornn in a pro game. Like, you're just never going to get the stacks to actually make that relevant, especially when your team is losing as much as it is. I understand the idea is hopefully we can stall this game out because we are already losing so much, and so our only win condition is us getting to 40, 50 minutes into the game and hopefully being able to just outstat them at that point. But Finn, I think, also played really bad in terms of the active laning phases. Team fighting wasn't necessarily there either. Just not a good game from him. I think Comp and Zoelise were obviously really bad as well. The Zeri was targeted regularly by the side of GX, and there was really not a lot of offensive plays made by Rogue, which is not uncommon for this team. In fact, that's kind of regular for how they like to play the game. So overall, just kind of a bad game for Rogue. Really not a lot else to talk about. This is pretty in line with how they've played for most of this year. Just no pressure, no prio, no effort really at all. It feels like the team is completely mental boomed. It feels like they don't really have a strategy. This is in line with the worst team in the league that they have been over the course of this year. And then for GIANTX, it is nice to pick up this win, and it's nice to get to 2-5 because that does put you in a better spot in terms of qualifying for the playoffs. However, you can't really stop here. You're not in the most safe position of anybody in the entire league. Like, yes, the bottom 3 teams are all kind of variable, and 2 wins might actually be enough to get you a tiebreaker in certain circumstances, but you want to get more than that. If you can win at least one more game here, I'm going to feel a lot better about GX moving into the playoffs. Then moving on to our second game of day number 1, and a very interesting clash that's kind of top of the table. Team BDS taking on Fnatic, and BDS picking up a very important win for themselves in a pretty dominant performance. Not only were they able to control the early game, they were better in the team fighting stage of this as well. Fnatic obviously on a pretty big hot streak going into this at 5-1. They had beaten G2 in the previous week, which was something that basically no top team has been able to do across this year. G2's only losses had really been to teams that they didn't try against, like Rogue, and so to see a team like Fnatic go out and just beat them and actually like play them strong and G2 not be able to beat them in a best of 1, it's a good sign. It doesn't immediately mean that they're going to be the better team in like a best of 3 or a best of 5 or something like that, but it is a very good sign that it's an option and it's a possibility for Fnatic. But then they come back out here in week number 3 and they lose to BDS, who has been significantly less consistent, more inconsistent across the spring split than they were in winter. I was super high on them in winter. I thought that they were clearly the second best team in the LEC. The only reason to me they didn't make finals was because Adam ended up, getting into an argument with the coach and got benched for the series. It happens, especially with Adam. It's certainly something that's become a conversation, but things seem to be fixed now, or at least, these players seem to be on the same page, and the coaching staff and Adam seem to be on the same page, which is all that really matters. And, BDS is trying to get back to that form that they were at the end of winter, and I think this is a very good step in that direction, mostly because it's not really how they've played. Ice and LeBron, yes, were definitely more of the weak side here for this team, but, Sheo was awesome, and that's not really been the game plan for the prototypical way that BDS has played this year. Sheo has been the weak link of this team, in my opinion, so far in 2024. I think if there was a reason to be concerned about BDS actually being a title contender, it's Sheo. Just not necessarily being that great so far this year, but he was amazing in this game. Completely out-jungled Razork. The early pressure on the Xin Zhao was incredible. Also, I'm going to point this out now. I'm not really going to bring this up too much over the rest of this week, but there is a ridiculous amount of prio on Vi in drafts, and I just do not understand. I've been talking about it for a while. Vi, to me, is like by far the most overrated pick in the game right now. I get what she does well. I get her CC is very good. Point and click lockdown on an ultimate is very solid. She can have relatively good early games, but then you get stuff like this happening where Sheo picks Xin Zhao and just really out pressures her in the early game, and all of a sudden Vi's not tanky. She's not dealing damage, and the lockdown is completely irrelevant, and this champion is useless. Like, there was literally nothing she could do, and we're seeing it, really heavily prioritized, if not banned regularly. It's getting picked very early in drafts, and I don't agree with the priority. I think Vi is very overdrafted in the current meta, and this game is, I think, a good example as to why. I think Razork obviously misplayed in a lot of these situations, but Sheo did a great job to capitalize on the inherent advantages that his champion has over the enemy here with the Xin Zhao over the Vi. So credit to Sheo. I also want to give a big shout out to Adam. He's not going to get the same kind of credit that someone like Sheo or even Nuke will get in this game because of their flashier plays, but Adam was probably the best team fighter in this game. He just was sensational in the back half, being able to set up plays for the Orianna in particular on that Renekton. It's not particularly easy to play Renekton into this comp if they play right. Obviously, they didn't, but a lot of peel on the side of Fnatic, and it just didn't matter. Like, Adam was everywhere, and, for all the people who always talk about, Adam can't play anything other than the Gods champions, he's so bad at Renekton, yada, 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 just show him this game. He's so good on Renekton. He's been great on Renekton his entire career, especially last year and this year as well. He'll have bad games here or there on a champion like this, but for the most part, it's still very positive. You give him an aggressive bruiser, he's gonna do fine. It doesn't just need to be the specific champions that he plays. You can basically give him any champion that's strong of that archetype, and he will make it work like he does with Renekton. Nuke was also solid. Humanoid was fine. Certainly wasn't the problem on the team, but Nuke was good. And then Ice and Labrov were solid on weak side. They didn't really have to do anything. They were definitely better in lane, though. So credit to BDS. They were absolutely the better team in this game, and that's a little concerning for Fnatic. It's not super shocking just because the LEC is so volatile and best of ones inherently are volatile, but, if you didn't see Fnatic randomly losing a game this week, at least one coming, then I don't know what to tell you. This is just how the LEC works. The moment a team feels like they're starting to gain momentum, that's when they start losing games. That's just how Europe has always been, or specifically the last, 3 or so years. It's just how it's always been, and so I'm not shocked to see specifically Razork come out and just put up one of the worst games that he has played all year long. Actually, I'm not going to say one of, the single worst game that he has played all year long by a large margin after he was amazing last week. This is just how the LEC goes. And also, this is just kind of how Razork plays. This is his playstyle. He is so reliant on early game leads. He's very reliant on pressure and being able to snowball the game out of control. And so when you lose the early game as hard as he did, when you really don't have any pressure and the mid-game skirmishes are not going your way, he is going to be one of the worst junglers in the league in that situation. Now, a lot of junglers do fall into that problem. We talk about it a lot on this channel. Snowballing in the jungle is more important than it's ever been. But Razork, I think, as a player, kind of exemplifies and embodies that ideology because he is not very good at playing from disadvantageous states. We saw it in the playoffs. We've seen it in previous years. It's always kind of been his problem. So, to see it happen here, it's not entirely surprising. But again, he just needed to be better in the early game. If he had gone neutral, I actually think this team has a chance to be able to do stuff because Humanoid was very active on the Karma. Oscar was really bad in this game. Don't look at the scoreline. I know 3-5-3 doesn't look all that bad in comparison to the 1-7-2 of Razork. But Oscar also really let his team down in terms of the team fighting. Definitely not helping his case in that he can only play tanks on the top side. And Noah and June were completely irrelevant. They got beaten up by Ice and Labrov in the isolated 2v2 and then did absolutely nothing the rest of the game, which has become a bit of a trend for them. Fnatic is still a good team, and I'm not going to freak out over a best of one loss, but, there are still flaws to this team. It's not like they're perfect in any way, shape, or form. And then for BDS, hopefully this is the start of them getting back on track from where they were in winter. Remember, they were one of, if not guaranteed, one of the top 2 teams in winter at full strength, and it really is upsetting that they've not been there so far in spring. And so to see them bounce back here and actually take down a team in Fnatic that I think a lot of people have very high expectations of, it's just a good sign for this, for moving forward, I guess. Then moving on to game number 3 here of day 1, and not really an upset in the same way that we got in the previous game. It's G2 Esports taking on SK Gaming, and G2 is going to pick up the win. Again, not an upset. This is not a surprise. It would only be an upset if you considered SK to be a truly awful team, and then they absolutely should have won this game because that's how G2 ends up playing. But nope, G2 is going to walk out of this with a pretty clean win. They are going to take first place by themselves after day number 1 here. Obviously, that might not stick the rest of the week. We will see how things end up going, but 6-1 is pretty darn good for SK. It is time for their yearly collapse. It's just kind of how this goes. 2-1 in week number 1, 3-4 starting off in week number 3. It's just really how things go for this SK Gaming team. It doesn't matter what their roster looks like. It doesn't matter who their coaches look like. They are consistently going to get worse as time progresses, and that's just how things are for SK Gaming. But let's go ahead and talk about the game itself. Player of the game is pretty obviously going to go to Broken Blade. Man, Rek'Sai looks strong. This champion is in a really good state for top lane right now. We're seeing it slowly pick up some steam globally. I think some people have been a little bit slow to try to adapt to it because of just the lack of amount of time on the new version of the champion, but I do think that if played at a high level, as we saw here for Broken Blade, it just works. It is just really hard to deal with. Very tanky, very mobile, and a lot of damage. And that's a really nice combo. That's Cassante. So watching it go into Cassante and really dominate it, it's really strong. So I expect Rek'Sai to continue rising in popularity. Also, for Broken Blade, I do think that he has gotten significantly better here in spring. I was really underwhelmed by how he played in winter. He was obviously good in the finals, but even before that in playoffs, he was really a non-factor and was kind of a negative in the regular season alongside Hans and Mickey X, who just weren't all that great for G2 in the regular season. It's really nice to see him come back out here in spring and actually put out some really good performances. I think he's been one of the better top laners in the LEC. The rest of this team did well, but The focal point was really on the Rek'Sai in the top lane. Caps played Annie and just completely mega gapped Niski in the mid lane matchup, was just everywhere on the map and really created a lot of opportunities that Niski was just not able to follow up on. Yike was amazing, as he has been. Him and Caps have been arguably the two best players in Europe across this year so far, so not shocking to see them come out and play well, but you gave Hansama Draven and they didn't even play for it. Like, that's how scary this was. Hansama got his Draven, still was able to pop off with that Nico support, which is a very interesting lane combination, by the way. You have so much pressure, but I could see how that could be very easily targetable if things end up becoming a little bit more aggressive down in the bot lane. But Hans was very good in this game. He knows the limits on that champion, and he knows exactly how enemy teams are going to play into him when he does get that champion as well. And Mickey was still good. I think this was just generally a pretty solid game from G2. Nothing to really talk about in any sort of major way outside of Broken Blade just being very relevant. It was kind of just a standard G2 game, and they were the better team. Not a lot of crazy stuff happened. And for SK, not a lot of crazy stuff happened. They just kind of were worse, and they ended up losing. I think it's pretty easy to point to a couple of players on this team not being strong. I think Niski is definitely the one that shows up first in my mind for this one. He's going to get dud of the game. On the Ahri, he's been generally fine over the course of this year. I thought he was great at the start of the year, as was Isma and Irrelevant, and Exekick and Doss have been, inconsistently great. This whole team has had moments where they've looked good. It's just been the consistency in the game-to-game that's kind of been a bit of a problem for them. And Niski, I think this was really his first bad game of the split. He's had a couple of not great ones, but this was the first one where it was like, oh god, you got absolutely destroyed. And Caps will do that to you every once in a while. I'm not sitting here and saying that I'm, shocked or upset that Caps just outplayed Niski. It's Caps, and he's done that to everybody that he's gone up against this year, but you would have liked to see him at least stay remotely relevant in this, which he did not. Isma went on this ridiculous flank in the back half of this game that I don't even really know what was going on. He was like 7 minutes late to the fight. Like, I don't really know what you're doing on Lee Sin, even if his early games were okay. And Exekick and Doss just were not active. Like, Exekick was way too far forward, did not know how Rek'Sai worked, and ended up, kind of paying for it. Exekick either has really great or really bad games. He's one of the most volatile AD carries in the entire league, which is not the kind of development I think you wanted to see from a very young, very promising player, but it's kind of what SK does. Irrelevant also got completely outplayed in the top lane, but people aren't going to talk about that because they really like him. So for SK Gaming, I just don't really see this team in a pretty positive light. Obviously, I think they're better than the absolute worst in the league, and I would expect them to continue to be better than the absolute worst in the league, but for a team that I think could have made a splash in winter, I think there is probably not a huge opportunity for them to make a splash here in spring when it comes to the best of 3 stage. And then for G2, they're the best team in the league until proven otherwise. I know they lost to Fnatic, but it's a best of 1. Anything can happen in a best of 1, and also they're so much more talented than every other team in the entire league. Everybody had to make concessions somewhere. G2 did not. This looks like a team that should be dominating the league, and that's exactly what they're doing right now. Then moving on to game number 4, if you thought the close games were coming on day number 1, I have some bad news for you. It's another blowout. Mad Lions Koi taking on Team Heretics, kind of a Spanish derby here, and Heretics are going to pick up the win in another dominant performance. I mean, it is truly crazy how not close the games here on day 1 have been, but credit to Heretics for just completely outplaying Mad Lions. And for Mad, I really do think a lot of the problems that they had in the previous split are now getting exploited a bit more by teams that have just gotten a bit better as the year has gone along. I think we're going to talk about where I think some of their issues lie. I don't think this is necessarily indicative of where their team is at in terms of, skill level. I still think they're going to be better than whatever this is, like getting absolutely obliterated by Heretics, but Heretics is clearly the better team right now, and I think that that has become clear as the split has continued on. So let's talk about it. Player of the game, obvious one here. It's going to go to Yankos. Massive jungle gap in this game. We'll talk about Elyoya in a second. I love Elyoya as much as anybody, but he is prone to a couple of bad games every once in a while. He's not exactly a perfect player. He's not going to sit there and be super consistent. It's just the games that he does win are super good, and so I've always been a little bit higher on him, I think, than your average analyst would, consistently calling him one of, if not the best jungler in Europe. But Yankos is on fire right now. I mean, the dude is absolutely lighting up the LEC in the spring split, which is really nice to see, because in my opinion, he was really bad in winter. He was not a good jungler. Obviously, having no mid prio is certainly going to hurt you, but his decision making, his team fighting, it was all really not good. Like, it was one of the worst splits I've seen Yankos have in a while, and it almost went under the radar because people just don't talk about Yankos when he plays bad, and that's fine. Like, he's a popular player, I understand it, but it's really nice to see him bounce back here in spring, get a mid laner that it feels like he has significantly better chemistry with, ironically enough, and genuinely get back to that form that he was at in 2023, where he was one of the best junglers in the entire league. Honestly, I think you could make the case that he's been even better this year than he or in this split than he was at any point last year in the regular season. We'll see how that translates into major series. series because this team is now at 5-2. They're obviously going to be in playoffs, and so you know you're going to get some best of 3, you know, out of this team. Hopefully some best of 5s out of this team if GIANTX can keep up this kind of play style, just being able to take over games early, really snowball, you know, things out of control. Then, you know, Heretics is going to be a very difficult team to beat. They have very good macro, and that's going to end up being a bit of a problem for other teams. Flacket and Trimby were also very good here. Zeri Rakan is a very strong lane. I continue to say it. Rakan feels ridiculously strong. We are going to keep seeing this as the week continues onwards. Rakan just kind of wins and looks very good when you put him on a support that is very active. And I love Supa and Alvaro. I think Supa is arguably the best AD carry in Europe at the moment. I certainly think there's been an argument to be made for the performances that he's put out being the best over the course of this year, but this game was not good for them. Flacket and Trimby were definitely better in this best of 1. A lot of that credit to me goes to Trimby, who I think did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the playmaking, but Flacket's positioning was excellent in this game, and Flacket is a very underratedly good AD carry. He has been very good ever since coming back up to the LEC from Heretics Academy last year. So then you got Zviru, Wonder. They were solid too. Merwin was miserable. We'll talk about him in the Mad Lions section, but overall, GIANTX being able to get this bot lane ahead really was the catalyst to get this game out of control, and it was over very quickly. This never really felt like it was going to be a particularly close game, but for Mad Lions, obviously not an ideal way to start off your week number 3. You probably wanted this to be at least a little bit closer, but alas, here you are sitting here with getting absolutely obliterated by Heretics. Elyoya is going to get done of the game. Jungle Canyon was massive. I mean, there's really nothing else to say. I like Elyoya, but like I said earlier, he is going to have some bad games every once in a while. It's just kind of who he was and who he is. He's never really been a player that's going to be great every single game. He's just going to be great in 80 to 85% of those games, but this was absolutely one of the 10 to 15% of games where he just absolutely runs it. It's fine. GIANTX is a good player. It's a best of 1. It's really hard to get really mad at him when he has been so good the rest of this year. Merwin also got mega gapped in the top lane. This is something that I really tried to point out in my primer video at the start of the split, is that Merwin looks really good when he gets this element of aggression and, you know, when he gets this element of knowing matchups better than his opponent. That's why I think he really thrives on these off-meta picks that other people just aren't expecting, is because when he knows how to play a matchup better than his opponent does, he's oftentimes just talented enough to be able to push that forward. But put him on something a little bit more standard, and someone like Wonder is just better than Merwin, and I think that's become clear. We saw people talking about him like a number 1, number 2 top laner in Europe. Obviously, I pushed back on that. I think I had him at number 5 going into the spring split here, and that was obviously up from the beginning of the year, but I think that's a lot more accurate towards where Merwin is at right now. He's going to lose to players that are a bit more consistent than him, but he does have the upside and the potential to win basically any game if you give him the right draft. Frescowy, Supa, Alvaro, not good. Supa and Alvaro in particular, not the best timing after Supa, you know, basically anointed himself as the best AD carry in Europe in that interview, but I kind of agree with him, and so I don't really necessarily disagree with the idea of saying it. Also, we need more trash talk. Trash talk is awesome. Look at what's been happening in the LCS with people chatting to each other in playoff games. It's awesome to see, you know, a player go out and proclaim that he's the best. It really inspires, I think, other teams to step up and try and beat him, and I think that's what we saw here. And then, you know, inversely, it'll, you know, force Supa and Alvaro to step up and really start to prove that they were correct for making that, you know, assertion. So I really like trash talk. I really like the Supa's confidence, but it did not necessarily pay off in this game. Overall, Mad was just not as good. There's really no other way to put it. They could have been better in this game, but they were not. They're at 2-5 now, and you know, they're, I guess, in danger of missing out on the playoffs. Things would have to go drastically bad for them down the stretch here. They really only need 1 win. I think 3 wins is probably going to be enough to get you into the playoffs. We'll have to see how the rest of the days end up going. 4 wins is going to be guaranteed, and so if they go undefeated the rest of this week, congratulations to them, but at least for now, they still are in danger at 2-5, especially with GX winning. And then for Heretics, 5-2, very good spot. They are locked in for playoffs at this point. They could be one of the scarier teams in the league. There's really no reason to believe this team can't make finals. I'm gonna not go as far as saying that they can win finals or that they should be, you know, expected to compete to win finals, because G2 is just that dominant. You would expect them to win any series that they're in, but Heretics might be the team that comes closest to being able to take down G2. Their macro is certainly the best, I think, of all of the other teams in the league. It's all about whether or not you really trust Fnatic, but at least for now, GIANTX is playing like an MVP, and the rest of this team is stepping up. There is a lot to like about how Heretics is playing at the moment. Then moving on to our 5th and final game of the first day here in week number 3. It is a French matchup. We just got the Spanish derby. How about the French derby here between Team Vitality and Karmine Corp? And Vitality is going to pick up the win here. This isn't an upset. Vitality's been very good across this year. I see people freaking out about K-Corp right now. You know, they're playing like an 8th place team. They are currently performing exactly like that. They're beating the teams that they are supposed to beat, and they're losing to the teams that they are supposed to lose to, and that ends up with them not being particularly strong. But if the expectation was for this team to completely turn around how they played in the winter split, I don't know how to tell you. That was a crazy expectation to have with absolutely no changes to this roster besides the coaching staff. There was just no way that they were going to randomly become a top 4 team overnight after having barely won games. I get that they, I guess, did better towards the back half of winter, but go watch my video at the end of winter to see why I wasn't super excited or super into, you know, those wins that KC had, and why I don't think they necessarily projected super well onto the future, why I don't think they mattered all that much. But for Vitality, this is a genuinely good team. They have a very interesting playstyle because I've never seen a team in this meta really ignore mid lane in the way that they do, but they can get away with it because VTO is so strong as an individual laner. And it really allows them to play towards the players that are a little bit more fringy, a little bit more in need of the resources, and also do really well with those resources, or just volatile players like the bot and top lane. So we'll talk about it. Player of the game is going to go to Hylissang. Twisted Fate Camille as a bot lane. You know, I'm pretty anti both of these picks in isolation. I think TF bot is obviously something I've talked about a lot on this channel. Is something I don't particularly like. I think he's very, very good in the top lane. One of the best top laners in the game. Very strong in the mid lane as well. I just don't see it in the bot lane. I think it takes away some of the advantages that TF has because you're not really pulling apart the team to create space for a hyper carry. You're more so trying to actually do a lot of the carrying through your split pushing, which I don't think is nearly as effective in this meta. And then Camille's support, I think, is generally just way too aggressive. We're seeing games go a little bit longer, but maybe not so much in the LEC, at least this day. There were a lot of blowouts, including this one. So you put these two together, it actually does kind of work because Camille can kind of isolate herself and still get a lot of resources. You're not really taking away her ability to scale and be a problem in the mid game. And, you know, the TF doesn't really need a ton of resources. He's going to be in a side lane for basically the entirety of this game. And so you really actually create these opportunities to 1-3-1 in a lot of different ways, and to create opportunities for, you know, things like the Aatrox and the Rel and the Orianna to create plays on their own side of the map, which is a very interesting draft. And I actually think it works really well in this particular instance. And Hylissang has to get a lot of credit for that. He played the Camille at a very high level. There's some sort of irony in him playing IG Camille in this game. Obviously the world skin that IG got for beating him in the World Finals, but still, it was a really good game from him. I think Carzzy obviously played well in that same vein. We'll talk about the enemy bot lane in just a second when we get over to KC, but I do want to give a lot of credit to VTO. I think this team has really changed up their style so much since winter. I talked about it a lot in winter, actually, that VTO really was the driving point for everything that Vitality wanted to do. He was an MVP candidate for me. You know, whether you want to say he was a top 3, top 5-ish guy in terms of the MVP race in winter, I think it's debatable. He was certainly in the conversation, but they've moved away from playing towards VTO and more towards playing for everyone else and just kind of letting VTO 1v1. He can absorb pressure from junglers like he did with Bo in these games, and honestly, as a laner, he's just going to be better than a lot of the people that he's playing into, specifically someone like Seiken, who's kind of just been a horrible laner at this level. I've talked about it a lot. I don't even think it's really a mechanics problem with Seiken. You watch him play the game, and he plays so scared, he plays so passive, he clearly just does not have any confidence in himself at this level, and so he goes into laning phase saying, I want to lose by 15 CS instead of I want to try and win, right? Like, it's just kind of the way that he looks at the game in the current state, and VTO was very much able to take advantage of that and get a lot of prio for his jungler Douglas in the mid lane. Photon was very good on the top side. Cabochard did generally fine. I think he made a couple of pretty major mistakes in terms of how he fought some of this game, but he wasn't the problem. Neither was Bo, obviously, who is the only proactive member on K-Corp. Vitality was just better. Like, they were able to play through bot lane. They were able to get this weird Twisted Fate Camille lane going, and then they had so much macro presence because of the way that their draft ended up working out that they were able to just kind of pick pieces off and eventually close the game out, even if they didn't have to be super aggressive when it came to fights to do so. And then for K-Corp, they're just not good. Like, what else do you want me to say? This is not a good team. I know a lot of people are just kind of waiting for K-Corp to break out. I'm sorry, I just don't think it's going to happen in this iteration of it. Their weaknesses are just too big in comparison to other teams. Targamas is a very clear dead of the game. He has been horrible. I mean, there is a strong argument to be made that he is clearly the worst player in the LEC, and that's a very sad thing to say because you go back to that G2 year, and there really was a lot to like. He set the assist record in the LEC in that year, and he goes over to Excel. Things are a disaster. He goes over to K-Corp. Corp, things are a disaster at the LEC level at the very least. He's been strong in Tier 2. It just has not translated, and I don't think there's really any world in which you aren't looking for a difference maker going into the summer split, going into the second half of the year. But it's not like he was the only one playing bad. Seiken, again, was horrible here, just gave up so much pressure. He didn't even really make any mistakes. He just gave up pressure. He just kind of gave it to the enemy team, and obviously Vitality is able to do a lot with that in a comp that's mostly focused around having good macro. Cabo Shard and Bo were generally fine, not the problem, even though, again, Cabo Shard was not particularly, impressive, or he didn't really do anything in this game, was way too passive for my liking. Same thing for Upset, but he had to play farming Senna. This is really a bad situation for him as well, and Bo is definitely the playmaker, the priority player, but again, I have to reiterate this every single video for those of you who don't watch my other pieces on this content. Bo is going to have one play every single game that is just horrible. Like, it is just a regular thing with Bo. He will play 90% of the game very well, and then he'll have one play where it's just like, why are you doing this? Like, where are you going? What play are you looking for? Clearly, you're not on the same page as the rest of your team. You take it because the one bad play is like what you're getting from everybody else already, except Bo also gives you 90% good, but that one bad play is really bad typically, and that's why I'm concerned about whether or not Bo can actually be an elite jungler on a top tier team here in the LEC, but that's neither here nor there. He's certainly not the problem in this particular circumstance, and so for KC, they are still in the running here. At 2 and 5, they're obviously not safe, but you've got a big cluster of teams at 2 and 5 now. You've got Mad Lions, you've got Corp, you've got GIANTX sitting at 2 and 5, you've got Rogue at 1 and 6, and so there are a lot of teams that are going to be fighting it out for those bottom 2 spots, and only a couple of them are going to be able to make that top 8. Corp definitely needs to step it up this week in a hard schedule. And then for Vitality, really nice win. 5 and 2 is indicative of this team's skill level. They are one of the top 4 to 5 teams in the LEC right now. Top 5 very much feels locked in, and Vitality is very much one of those, top 5 teams. Whether or not they're going to be good enough to make their way into the top 4, I think is to be determined. But I really like the way they play the game. I like the way they're identifying their strengths and weaknesses, and I think there is an opportunity for them to continue to grow as the year goes on. Then moving on now to day number 2, our middle day here in the final week of the regular season in the spring split, and we kicked off day 2 with the matchup between SK Gaming and Fnatic. Their teams moving in different directions, and they continue to move in those directions with Fnatic rebounding after their day 1 loss. This was definitely a better performance from them, at least on the whole. There still were definitely problems. We will talk about that. This is one of those rare games that is going to get a dud of the game on the winning team, which we will talk about, but SK Gaming is one of those teams that Fnatic should absolutely be beating, and relatively cleanly at that. Obviously, a tough week for SK having to face G2 and Fnatic to start out, but 3 and 5, this is where this team probably should be. This is not a particularly great League of Legends team. They've got a lot of problems. I think a couple of their players just don't really have a lot of consistency to them, and so even if they have talent, I just don't expect they're going to be able to put it together to be one of the more interesting teams, which is why I consider the league right now to be kind of top 5 versus, I don't want to say bottom 5, it's like top 5 and then bottom 1 with Rogue, and then everybody else is kind of in their own little cluster, so we'll talk about it. For Fnatic, player of the game is going to go to June. This is the first player of the game I have ever given him on this channel in both the LCK and the LEC. This is easily, without a doubt, the single best game that he has played as a professional. I don't even think it's relatively close. Noah and June were awesome in this one. Exakick and DOS, as we know, can have really good games. There are going to be moments where they just win lane and snowball the game out of control, and then they're going to have games where they are completely useless, where Exakick is consistently getting dove by the Alistair, and it's just death after death after death. And that's exactly what happened here. June was phenomenal. How has his year been? Kind of weird, like kind of uneventful, if I had to be honest. Like, that's the word I would use. This has not been a particularly great bot lane, but it's certainly not been like the single worst bot lane in the entire league. It got better as things went on in winter, and it's been better in spring as well. They've not been stars, they've just been good. Like, June has not been great, but he's not really been that bad either. He's just kind of been average. He's just kind of been there. Kind of a non-factor, I think, is the word I would use. And Noah's kind of been a similar thing. I think he's had bigger highs and bigger lows over the course of this split than June has. I've not really been blown away by this bot lane. I still don't think, mechanically speaking, June is that good as a support, but this is one of those games, and really the first time that I've watched a June game and been like, oh, like, that's in there. Like, it's good to know that he has this in his back pocket if things end up going right. Play more Alistair. I mean, if this is what you're going to get with Alistair, play this champion more, because genuinely, he's a player that I've ragged on, over the course of his career, whether rightfully or wrongfully, and this is the best he has ever looked, and to me, it's not even really really close. Noah was also very good in this game. He's very inconsistent. It's just kind of what you're going to have to live with Noah, and not only Noah, but every AD carry in Europe is just crazy inconsistent. You're going to have good games, you're going to have bad games. Fortunately, Noah is in a good stretch right now. I would say his recent performances have been mostly positive for Fnatic. It's just whether or not you think he's going to be able to keep that up. I think for the most part, he should be fine. I think he's going to be like a middle tier AD carry the rest of the year, and you live with that. Razork and Humanoid were definitely better, and I think more encouragingly, they were not the focal point for this game, and Fnatic were still able to win. I think a lot of the takeaway from that game earlier this week against BDS was Razork lost, that means Fnatic lost, and that was certainly something that I was concerned was going to be a trend as well. Now, Razork definitely won in this game. He had more pressure, he was definitely more active as the jungler in the early game, and so it's hard to really like pinpoint that that is definitely not the case, but it's nice to see them be more secondary players on a team that has really relied on both Razork and Humanoid for the most part to win all of their games over the course of the beginning of this year. But like I said earlier, unfortunately, Dud of the game is going to stay on the winning team here because it's going to go to Oscar Rinnan. He just was the worst player in this game. Irrelevant mega gapped him. I know that doesn't necessarily show in the scoreline for Irrelevant. He played really well here. He's going to have really good performances against top laners he's just better than. He's just going to struggle a bit more against top laners that he isn't better than. But Oscar, he is clearly better than Oscar. That has become apparent in my eyes, and Oscar is really becoming a problem for Fnatic. He'll have good games every once in a while, but man, the bad games are so bad. Like, they are almost game losing. He almost single-handedly lost this game for Fnatic, allowing, Exakick to get more gold, allowing Niski to start scaling in on the Corki. Like, this was just not a good situation for Oscar on the Poppy. This is a champion he's supposed to be good at, and he certainly was not in this game. So, he's lucky, I think, to be able to walk out of this with a win, but Noah and June were definitely the carries. The bot lane looking very good for Fnatic in this one. For SK, it's just hard to point to anything other than their lack of perceived upside as to why this team is starting to perform the way that they are. I like a couple of players on this team. Doss is a player that I've really started to get interested in terms of the long-term future. He was not very good in this game, and honestly, he has been a bit worse in spring than he was in winter. I think part of that has to do with the fact that Exakick has been significantly worse in spring than he was in winter, but Doss, I think, has struggled because of that as well. Exakick was just consistently dove over and over again. It's hard to even really blame him. He would have been done of the game if it weren't for Oscar almost throwing it for Fnatic, but how much is it really his fault, right? When you're constantly getting Vi and Alistair over and over again, and the rest of your team is just not choosing to peel for you on Varus, at some point, it's not your problem anymore. At some point, the rest of your team actually has to start doing something to help you out. I certainly think his positioning could have been better, and he's really not on a good run of form at all right now, but it's worth noting that it's really hard to blame him individually for the misplays that he made. I do think Niski played some of these fights pretty well, but Corki's just way too slow. One of the weaker mids that consistently still gets play in pro, in my opinion. And Irrelevant was good. At least he was a positive for this team. Again, I'm not the biggest Irrelevant fan in the world, which is crazy considering how I was talking about him in 2022, when I was like, this guy's amazing, no one's talking about him, and now everybody's like, he's the best top laner in the region. It's the same thing with Merwin. When he's able to get an advantage, when he's able to play a matchup that he feels comfortable in, he's going to be really good, and he's going to be very comfortable and confident. He's going to be able to translate leads, but he's just not going to be able to do that against everyone in the league, like players like Photon and Broken Blade have been able to do over the course of this split. So that's why I think there is a little bit of a tier difference there, but Irrelevant's still a very good player, and Oscar was certainly not. So credit to him, but SK just doesn't have the firepower to beat Fnatic. When you're losing to the part of the team that has kind of been a weakness for them over the course of this year, it's certainly not the most encouraging thing, but it is a nice win for Fnatic. They're still in play for the #1 seed should things continue to go their way. If G2 loses another game, then they will be, of course, tied in terms of series score, and Fnatic did beat them, so they will have the tiebreaker. They want to finish out this split at 7-2. They want to try to get that #1 seed, and it definitely still is in play for them. Then moving on to our second game of day number 2, and this one actually does have pretty big playoff implications. Team Vitality taking on GIANTX, and GX picking up a very important win here. This is their second of the week. It moves them to 3-5, and there is a lot of teams that are kind of in that 3-5 cluster now, or at least in the zone of that 3-5 cluster. We'll see how things continue to play on in day number 2 after this, but big win for GX, a team that I think I and a lot of other people thought was just going to kind of roll over and die, not necessarily have the upside to be able to take down teams like Vitality. Well, here they are, capitalizing on the inconsistencies that Vitality is showing. There were quite a few problems with how Vitality ended ended up playing out this game. A couple of big misplays, mostly coming from the bot lane on their side, which we will definitely talk about, but the proactivity of GX has to also be commended. It wasn't just Vitality making mistakes, it was GX forcing mistakes, and I think that's something that we really haven't seen from this team. You know, the positives that we've given them are their floor. I think inherently these players are going to be generally at a certain level because of their experience. Players like Peach, Odoamne, Patrick, Ignar in particular have so much experience at this level. They know how to win, they know where they're supposed to be, and so you're not going to get these horrendous, you know, games like you get with teams like Corp or even teams that are better than them theoretically, like SK Gaming or Mad Lions, where their floors are just a little bit lower in terms of how bad their games can get. However, their upside has always been very limiting for me. To me, they have the smallest upside in the entire league. Their good games look the worst of any of the good teams, or at least that's what I would think on paper with how this team is constructed. However, they did really well in this game to actually push the tempo, to do a lot of the really aggressive things that I just didn't necessarily think this team was going to play towards, and honestly, just a lot of really good signs coming out of this. Player of the game is going to go to Peach for me. In the jungle, phenomenal rel game. He was everywhere on the map, constantly applying pressure to his laners. I think a lot of people are going to look at Jackie's and how he played this game and give it to the Taliyah because of his ability to affect the map as a whole, but a lot of the plays that were made were Rel and Taliyah going out and making those plays, and that's why I think it was really impressive to see GX capitalize on it so well. So credit to them. I think the Rel was huge for how GX wanted to play. The engages were super free. Obviously, you can get so many good setups from that champion, and Peach, when he's on engagers like this, looks significantly better. I've never really seen him as a carry player, always as somebody who's kind of in the mold of a Tarzan, wants to be more of a facilitator on these more tanky engagers, wants to try to be a playmaker, but more so as a secondary player, not as a carry, doesn't need to be the focal point in terms of the resources that are being gathered by the team, and I think this was a great example of that. I've kind of described Peach as the definition of mid throughout his time here in the LEC, and I'm still not entirely out of that frame of mind. I don't think he's a bad player, I just think he's an average player. Like, he is the definition of a player that I don't think pushes you over the top, but also one that I don't think is going to drag you down. It's going to be more so about the players around him, and I think the players around him did play well, but this was one of those games that he has that is just really good. He didn't have a lot of these last year. It's nice to see that he has them in the tank for this year. Patrick has also been very good this week. Kalista plus Rakan, I should say, I almost said Renata just out of habit at this point, but Kalista and Rakan I think is a very strong lane. Renata's kind of been the default support, I would say, for Kalista over the course of this year. Rightfully so. That laning phase is ridiculously difficult to try and deal with, but Rakan is very strong. We've seen it all week long. We are going to continue to see it as we continue to move along. Rakan is in a very good state, and Patrick then capitalized on a lot of the engages Ignar gave him in a very clean manner. Jackie's was still very good, even if I don't think he was as good as maybe the player of the game voting would indicate. Odoamne was solid, was maybe the better top laner, although didn't really have to do a whole ton on the Gnar. This was generally just a very good team-oriented game from GX with, you know, the Rel and the Taliyah being everywhere and really allowing your Kalista to get as much gold as possible, and then just ending the game with some really good, well-coordinated fights. Very, very clean and very important for GX to pick up this win. But for Vitality, it's kind of frustrating to see them lose this, if only because you were really starting to get excited about this team building something more consistent as we were going along. But obviously, that is just not going to be the case here. This bot lane is never going to be perfect every single game, and that's just what you have to live with if you're Vitality bringing in Carzzy and Hylissang. Dud of the game is going to go to Carzzy for me. If you want to give it to Hilly on the Braum, I think it's fair as well. I saw a lot of people complaining about Smolder and saying like, oh, how bad must you be to lose on Smolder, etc., etc. I know this is more of like an LEC thing at this point, but obviously people still complain about this in the LCK and the LPL. I just want to remind people, Smolder's got like a 44% global win rate. This champion is not like unbeatable. Like, yes, I think he's the strongest AD carry in the game, and a lot of that win rate is, you know, superfluous. I think there are situations, obviously, where Smolder would pop off, and there are games that are won by Smolders that would not be won by other champions, but pretending like, you know, oh, Smolder not popping off in the late game after he lost early, that must mean the player is bad. No, we've seen this all the time. If you shut down Smolder in the early game, as long as the enemy team doesn't give him free stacks as the game goes on, then you're gonna be able to get back into it. It's all really about how the opposition ends up playing, and, you know, playing something like Kalista Rakan, you're going to be able to continuously apply pressure. It's not really just going to end after the early laning phase. So credit to Patrick and Ignar, but Carzzy's positioning this game was really bad. Consistently in bad spots. His laning was pretty horrendous. One of the worst laning games that I've seen Carzzy have in a while. I know Smolder's bad in lane, but you gotta play better than this, and it's not like Hylissang really helped him out on the Braum. VTO was irrelevant, and Photon and Douglas really didn't do anything either. Douglas lost a lot of pressure in the early game to Peach, and so you're essentially just looking at this team that bot lane got destroyed, and that was your win condition, and now you lose. And yeah, do I want to chalk that up to it not being that bad of a loss? I kind of do, but this is the second or third time this split that this has happened, where they've just drafted a very weird comp, not executed on their game plan, and instantly lost to a team they should beat because of it. So it's really hard to get a grasp on what Vitality is going to be going into best of 3s, best of 5s, if they do end up making that stage because of the inherent inconsistency of the lineup. But for GX, this is a nice win. Again, they are trying to get into top 8. It is certainly not out of the realm of possibility, and honestly, they're on pretty good trajectory to do so. I talked about how 3 wins very well could be enough to get you in basically automatically. That's definitely still in play, with teams like Rogue and K-Corp still at 2 wins or 1 win respectively, obviously, but you would love for them to come out in day number 3 and actually be able to get that 3-0 week. Either way, they are hotter now than they've been at any point this year, and I think that's a really good sign. Then moving on to game number 3 here of day 2, and another very important matchup in terms of playoff qualification. It's Team BDS taking on Mad Lions Koi. And Mad Lions picks up a win here. This is kind of an upset, I think, especially with how these two teams have been going in recent weeks. Mad Lions has really not looked all that good. They've not looked all that consistent, and yet here they come in this game, and they really just kind of survive an onslaught from BDS. But for BDS, a lot of their good momentum ends up halting here because they had a game plan that just really, really did not work out. Do I think this result would happen, 10 times out of 10? No, I do not. I think BDS in a best of 5 would lose this game number 1, adjust their strategy, and then go into the rest of this series with a pretty big advantage because they were more proactive. They were better for a lot of this game. They just made bad plays, and they ended up losing a lot of the pressure they were able to generate because of it. They really wanted to focus on trying to shut that Smolder down, and I understand that giving over Smolder, it's not ideal, and so you want to make sure that you play super aggressive into him so that he can't really have a lot of those tools to end up scaling into the late game and make the game pretty inevitable for the other side. However, this is not the way to do that. You don't stop Smolder by constantly pressuring him down in the bot lane and then just giving him kills over and over again. That's not really going to stop him from scaling into the late game. Player of the game for me is pretty obviously going to go to Supa. I know a lot of people are going to look at Elyoya, and trust me, we'll talk about him. He was very good in this game at controlling tempo. This was a significantly better performance than what he showed on day 1 against Heretics, and this is what Elyoya does. He'll have a bad game every once in a while. He's not prone, or not immune to those, I should say, but every single time, the next game he has is an absolute banger. It is very, very cool to watch and very fun to watch. Elyoya does not stay down for long. It's kind of been a thing in his career, but Supa was definitely the player of the game for me because he received so much attention from BDS. He was clearly the main character of this game, and, part of that I think has to do with the fact that they gave him Smolder. I think another part of that is obviously the interview that he did where he called himself the best AD carry in Europe. People are just generally going to be more wanting to prove you wrong when you go into a game with that kind of mentality, but credit to Supa. He did a fantastic job of absorbing that pressure, being super useful in this game, and actually just being the hard carry in the back half on Smolder when you're really kind of put in this position where you're a late game hyperscaling champion and the enemy is doing everything they can to shut you down. If you're still able to outplay them, if you're still able to get online, especially of your own accord, credit to Elyoya and Alvaro. We'll get into them in a second, but, Supa was a big part of why this team ended up doing well, so I want to give him that credit. Elyoya was the other player that you do have to point out. He was great at capitalizing on the mistakes that BDS were making. Obviously, investing in the bot lane was a little bit of a negative for them, but while they were doing that, he was either covering bot lane and actively winning fights and getting that Smolder ahead, or alternatively, he was just getting stuff elsewhere on the map and just creating these gigantic gold leads for Mad Lions to be able to capitalize on. It was really good stuff from him. Supa and Elyoya were definitely the stars for me. Alvaro definitely deserves credit for getting a lot of that peel off. Kalista Renata is a hard lane to end up dealing with as Smolder if you don't have help, and so Alvaro playing really well on the Braum just kind of shows you how this lane can go if things end up going right, kind of the opposite of what we saw from Vitality in the previous game. Frescowy, Merwin, they were fine as well. I don't think they were essential. They certainly didn't do anything that I think was super dominant. It's very funny. I was very excited for Adam versus Merwin because I think they're very similar players, which I think is just generally a very funny thing. This community talks about Adam as this person having a small champion pool. He can only really play his champions, and I think that's what Merwin is as well. It's funny how the community uses that as a negative against Adam and a positive against Merwin. I imagine in 2 years it will shift to a negative against Merwin because that's just how things go. That's how fandom is in the LEC. You get turned on very easily unless you just become one of the popular players like GIANTX, but Adam was bad in this game. That's kind of the transition that I had into that. It's kind of funny because I think Adam's been very consistent over the course of his career. You can talk about how he is a very aggressive player, like playing Olaf and Darius and things like that. You're not always going to win every single laning phase. You're not always going to be in the best of positions. But ironically enough, there are a lot of top laners that lose significantly more than Adam does. He wins a lot more than your favorite top laner does, and which is why I've always liked him. I'm a big fan of consistency, and Adam just doesn't have those game-losing games like a lot of other top laners do, or at least he didn't before this split. Whatever happened, I think, right before the semifinals has clearly affected the synergy that he has with the rest of this roster, because while he can make things work, like he was really good on Renekton earlier this week, this game was awful. His team fighting was bad. He just wasn't able to transition to anything. Like, he just was slow on every single play, and honestly, it's happened more this split than it's happened at any point in the last year and a half, really, ever since he came back into the LEC from BDS Academy. I don't really know what the problem is in the current moment, but this is clearly the worst split that he's had since coming back in, and I think that that is at least a little bit of a cause for concern. Do I think that that's going to persist? You certainly would hope not, but I do think it's possible because of the implications of the off-the-rift stuff. I don't want to try and speculate on anything, but he was not good in this game. You know, Sheo, I think, lost a lot of pressure from just making bad decisions in the mid game, and it really ended up costing BDS. Same thing for Labrov, who I think didn't make great decisions. Overall, BDS, it's hard to really criticize them too much because they had a game plan and they tried their best to execute on it. It just didn't work out. Do I think they would adjust their game plan and move into a different game against Mad Lions with a different structure? Absolutely. I think they would, and I think they would probably still have a chance to be the better team in that series, but at least in this best of one, they took a risk and it did not pay off. But for Mad, they capitalized very well on that risk and on that failure to capitalize from BDS, and you got to give them credit for that too. I still don't think all of the problems for this team have gone away, but it's nice to see they can win in situations like this. And then moving on now to the fourth game of day 2, and this one certainly made things a lot more interesting. If you didn't see this outcome coming, I don't really know what to tell you. This was so predictable for me. It was Rogue taking on G2 Esports, and of course Rogue won. Like, what did you expect to happen here? I think everyone and their mothers should have been able to call this. I tweeted this out, like, when it happened. People were like, how does this happen? I'm like, if you didn't see this coming, that's on you. Like, truly, that's your fault. This is gonna happen every single year. G2 is going to lose to the worst team in the league, or the best team in the league, I should say, is going to lose to the worst team in the league. It doesn't always happen to be G2. I remember this happened a couple of years ago when Rogue was really good and they randomly lost to that like 0-17 Astralis team. It's just something about the LEC. You cannot win the games you are supposed to win, and Rogue, actually, this matters. Like, this is a game that is consequential towards the playoff race. Now, it might not be. We will see what happens, but this keeps Rogue alive. They are not eliminated just yet. If they had lost this, they would have been the first team eliminated from the playoffs at 1 win. There was no way they could get to 3 to get to that number that you would have to get into to at least get a tiebreaker. But, you know, congratulations to Rogue. I don't think really anybody out there expected them to be able to keep their season alive this long, but none of this matters if they don't win tomorrow. We'll talk about this game now, but at least they're still alive. Player of the game for me is going to go to Marcoon in the jungle. You know, I'm a Marcoon fan. I've been a Marcoon fan for a long time. This year has definitely not made that opinion look all that great, but I think he's been great over the course of his career. He was the best player on Excel in 2022, and, you know, he was a big breakout star in 2021 for them. And then he goes over to SK Gaming, and they really overachieve for a lot of that year. They're able to make top 6 by the end of the year, and even though they're not able to do anything there, I think a lot of people can agree that Marcoon had a very good year on SK Gaming last year. So he comes over here to Rogue, and then you put him with Larson, and it's the 2 slowest players in the entire league, and all of a sudden things end up not working out. I think obviously this is a bit more of a playstyle issue than it is a mechanics issue, because Marcoon's mechanics are still very good, and he still has the potential to take over games. He just needs to be in a situation to do so, and this was a great situation for that. They played a slower comp into a slower comp, and all of a sudden Rogue actually gets to team fight from neutral, and they're pretty good in that environment, at least in comparison to their early games. They've been a little bit inconsistent in the back half of games, but Marcoon actually able to team fight on the volley bear in a very efficient way. Being a really big playmaker in this one, it's really good stuff. He gapped Yike in terms of the impact that he was able to have on the map, and that's a really encouraging sign, even if I don't think it's going to be entirely repeatable. Larson was also very good here. He just was better than Caps. This is just one of those games where Caps mentally takes it off. He has one of these every single split where it's just like, yeah, you weren't locked in, you weren't trying, it's fine. I'm not going to freak out about Caps. He's Caps, and he's having the best split that he's had maybe since like 2019, 2020, so it's really hard for me to be upset that, you know, he comes out here and loses to Larson, but Larson was great. He capitalized on the slowness of the game, and his team fighting was essential for Rogue on that Orianna to be able to set up a lot of plays for the Senna and for the volley bear and the Aatrox even to really be able to take advantage of. I thought Zoe Elise was pretty solid here. Him and Comp, I think, had a pretty great game. You know, we'll talk about Hansama and Mickey. Smolder's not unbeatable, man. Like, even when you get into these late game 37-minute fights, like, even with stacks, like, Smolder still can be beaten. Still low range, just a lot of damage. So, a lot of, you know, tools to be able to shut that down. And Finn was solid on the top side, too. Rogue was just pretty complete here. They kind of played their style, and they played it well. This is one of the better showings they've had. But again, is it repeatable? Probably not. For G2, is this repeatable? Yeah, I mean, it'll be repeatable. Like, they will do this again later on in the year, but I don't think this is an indicator of where G2 is at in terms of power level. This is obviously an important loss for them because it does put them at 6-2, which means they are tied with Fnatic, which definitely makes the final day more interesting to see who might get the #1 seed, but for G2, it's just kind of par for the course to lose a game like this. Dud of the game is going to go to Mickey X. I have a hot take here. I don't know how hot this take is, but it's certainly a take. I think if Mickey was on any other team in the league right now, it would be significantly more apparent how not good he has been. I think he has easily been the worst player on G2 across this year so far. He's been a net negative, I would say, for them overall, even if he was a bit better in the best of fives. Obviously, him and Hansama definitely played better once they got into those more serious series, but in the regular season in particular, Mickey has been a detriment to this team. There are games that he just completely runs it. Kind of reminds me of 2022 Mickey on Excel, although I do think that split was still worse than this one was. He was very bad on Excel, and I do think he is okay, at least on G2. Like, he's good in the wins, but he really has not been an asset for this team. And I think, again, if he was on a team that had less carries or was winning less consistently or was less dominant overall, I think it would be more noticeable. Like, he's having a very similar split and year to someone like Hylissang. And I think Hylissang gets a lot more hate than someone like Mickey X does because of the circumstance and the situation surrounding him. And so, you know, I don't think he was like the worst player of all time in this game, but it's certainly something to monitor. Caps was also just not good enough. And again, that happens every once in a while, especially when you put him on something like Karma. He's going to lose pressure in that. You know, the Smolder was never relevant. Yike got gapped in the mid lane. G2 just lost, and they lost to Rogue, and it's fine. This doesn't change my opinion on either of these teams, but it does make the race down the stretch more interesting. The scriptwriters knew what they were doing. G2 now has a lot of pressure to win that final game against Vitality in order to get themselves that #1 seed, and Rogue still has the potential to make top 8. That is very much in play if they're able to win tomorrow, which is certainly not out of the realm of possibility. It would be a pretty massive upset, but Rogue doing a great job to keep their hopes alive. And then moving on to our final game of the second day here, the middle day, we had another very important game for playoff qualification. Corp taking on Team Heretics. And Heretics is going to pick up a win. The day of upsets is not going to continue here with KC picking up a win. They will pick up a loss to put them to 2-6, and this definitely makes their playoff run a lot more up in the air. 3 wins is really what you need to hit in order to get to a comfortable spot or even really be in play to make the playoffs, and especially with Rogue winning earlier in the day, like, now you're in a really not great spot because there's a chance that, you know, you could get 10th. You could get 10th in back-to-back splits here if you end up losing on the final day and, you know, if some crazy things happen. And so that's super not ideal for Corp, but this is a nice win for Heretics. They're still in play for the #1 seed. They're now at 6-2 alongside Fnatic and alongside G2. If they can get that #1 seed, that would be crazy. It would take a lot. You would certainly need some things to go your way, but it's possible. Like, it's in the realm of possibility, especially if you can end out this split 7-2, which would be big. But, you know, again, this team is actually very consistent. I really like the way this team plays macro. Like, I think that they are very, very sharp in terms of playing the map. Obviously, a lot of that credit has to go to Trimby. I think adding him to this lineup has done a lot, but really the player that has improved the most or gotten the most benefit from it has been Flakked. That's what we all predicted going into this split. I talked about it a ton in the primer, where the addition of Trimby was, in my opinion, specifically directed to try to get the most out of Flakked as an AD carry, and that's exactly what he's been. I mean, Yasuo Senna is a very volatile lane, but you know what? They freaking pulled it off in this one. This was a really good game from Flakked on the Yasuo. He was really active, was really moving around the map, and was the most important part of a lot of these team fights. You have to give him credit for that. He has been one of the most productive AD carries in the entire league this split, and hopefully that's going to be able to keep up. I've actually always been a pretty big fan of Flakked. You know, even on the G2 days, I was lower on him because of his role, and generally, you know, I think I was high on Targamas, and that obviously turned out to not be ideal, as we saw in this game in particular, but you know, ever since he joined Heretics, was on their ERL team, I've been really, really pleased with what I've seen from him. I loved him when he came up in summer of last year. I thought he really reinvigorated that team, especially in the regular season, and he's been really solid this year. He has very much made a case to be made that he's a top 3-ish AD carry in Europe, and I think that that is a pretty fair, you know, thing to say at this point when it comes to Flakked. This was a great game. Of course, Trimby does help out on the Senna. Really hard to just kind of do this on your own. It's nice to see Trimby really step up and be a big piece on a more supportive marksman like that. Zviru, I think, has been solid. Maybe not a star. Like, I don't think he's someone that's come in and really dominated a lot of these games. He's more so just kind of been a cog in the machine, but that's better than what they were getting from Perks last split for sure, who was not a cog in the machine. He tried to be the machine every game, and sometimes it would work, and most of the time, it would not for this Heretics team. Jankos has looked better because of it. Wonder, I think, has looked better because of it. I think generally Heretics is just a super consistent team, which means that going into the playoffs, they're going to get absolutely blasted, because that's what happens in the LEC. The moment you start to look remotely consistent, that's the moment you start to completely fall off. So hopefully that doesn't happen, because I really like the way this team is playing right now. But for KC on the other side, they're just not good enough. At 2-6, this is not a good place to be. You can still make playoffs. It is definitely still possible should the final day go your way. You can at the very least get a tiebreaker with a win on the final day, but you need that win now at 2 wins. You need to get to 3, and that's not exactly going to be the easiest task in the world in their final game. But let's talk about what happened here. Saken's gonna get my dud of the game. His Karma is just not very good. His Q is so big. Like, Karma's Q is so big. It is such an easy skill shot to hit when you mantra Q it, and he can't hit it. Like, it is unhittable for Saken. It is just crazy how in his own head he is. He's constantly trying to predict movement. He's constantly trying to catch his opponents out. And he doesn't need to do any of these things. It's just, it's too much. He needs to go back down and get his confidence and his mental back, because it just feels completely ruined at the moment in the LEC. Cabochard, Bo, no synergy at all. Absolutely negative synergy. I understand that Olaf plus Jarvan isn't exactly the best combination in the world, because Olaf needs to run at you and Jarvan kind of puts an entire wall around the enemy, which isn't ideal for the Olaf, but there's a way to make this work. Neither of them made this work. Bo had a surprisingly bad game. I think a lot of people aren't going to talk about that, but he was not good here. Upset and Targamas weren't as good as the other side, but they were far from the biggest problem on this team, I guess. If there is a positive, it's that. But Saken, Bo, they had bad games, and Bo's not having a particularly good week. Saken's just not good enough at this level. Targamas completely ran it earlier this week. They are in danger of missing playoffs for the second split in a row. I know a lot of people, me included, assumed that they were going to figure something out, that they were going to show up and be better, because there's been all these rumors and reports of them being so much better than this in scrims, in a lot of these more or less intensive environments. But on stage, it's just not working. Their weaknesses are too big to hide, and it doesn't really matter that they're making good plays every once in a while, because it's not about your good plays, it's about how bad your bad plays are. If you have the worst bad plays in the league, you're going to be the worst team in the league, and that's what's happening right now. But for Heretics, again, nice win. They're in play for first place. Again, it's going to be difficult because of the way tiebreakers work out, but if they are able to win on the final day, they're going to put themselves in the best possible position for that. They've looked very good. I'm not going to say this team is going to be completely world beaters, like, no matter what, but this is clearly just a better version of what they were last split. Then moving on to our third and final day of action here in the Spring Split regular season. I'm excited to get into this. There is a lot going on, and tiebreakers are definitely still a real possibility. Not just one, but multiple potentially if we get to that point. So a lot on the line here, but we kick it off with a matchup between Team Heretics and GIANTX. That GIANTX is going to pick up a win in. That's going to move them to 4-5. That's a 3-0 week after coming into the week at, what, 1-5? Yeah, that's pretty darn good. That's a pretty good way to close out your split. This is ideal for GX. This is ideal for GX fans. And, you know, obviously for Heretics, we just got done praising their consistency and they come out here and lose to a GIANTX team. But at least this GIANTX team is super hot right now and they're playing very well. A lot to like about this. And with that 4-5 record, by the way, they have officially clinched a playoff spot. No tiebreaker needed. 4 wins is enough to get you in guaranteed. And so for a team that was going into the week with tied for the worst record in the entire league, they're walking out guaranteeing themselves in the playoffs after the first game without needing a single tiebreaker. That's a pretty darn good week, if I do say so myself. Player of the game is going to go to Otoamne in the top lane. Really hard to go anywhere else on this. He absolutely massacred Wonder. We'll talk about the Rek'Sai pick in a second, but there are weaknesses. There are, you know, things that it doesn't do particularly well. You know, Broken Blade made it look super broken earlier on in the week, but, you know, we've seen a couple of games in this later section that have not been particularly good from it, and we'll kind of talk about that. But man, Odo played the hell out of Jace. Let's just be honest. He absolutely massacred Wonder. And for a player that I've really ragged on across this year, him and Patrick have been the two players that I think I've been the most disappointed by on GX across this year so far. I think Jackie's has been better than I expected, and Peach and Ignar have been almost exactly what I was expecting going into the year, but Odo's had one of the worst years of his career so far. But right when they need him most, he steps up and he comes to the plate and he hits a home run. I mean, he absolutely obliterated this game. I know a lot of people are making the joke that, oh, Odo stepped up because Rogue's playoff, race was on the line. This really doesn't change Rogue's path all that much. I mean, they already really needed to win in order to get in because they're at 2 wins, and there really isn't a lot else that needs to be in their control. If they beat SK Gaming, they have the same record as SK Gaming, and if they at the very least get a tiebreaker with them. So I know the meme is funny. I know it's like Odo and Trimby both stepping up and, trying to get Rogue out of the playoffs, but this doesn't really change Rogue's trajectory, so I don't really understand the point of the joke at all. But either way, Odo played really well. He was really good in this one on the Jace. Patrick was also very good. Him and Ignar had a phenomenal week. Peach had a phenomenal week, in my opinion, for GX. Obviously, you go 3-0, you're probably going to have a good week for most of your players, but it was honestly everybody. Like, everybody chipped in here for GX. This was kind of a domination of a game, and you just got to be impressed with what this team has output so far. Peach has been excellent this week. You're really happy to see them start to peak at the right time, if you will. I think that's a pretty good way of saying it, and you're hoping that they're going to be able to keep it up. I don't think this team is going to be as competitive in the playoffs once we get into best of threes, because again, I still think their mechanical ceiling is a little bit lower than other teams, but at least for now, it's looking pretty good. And then for Heretics on the other side, you would have liked to have fought for first place. This really makes that a lot more difficult. You have to hope for both Fnatic and for G2 to end up losing as well, and even then, I still think that you don't get the #1 seed. I don't really know what else would happen here, but you needed to win this, I think, in order to get that, so you're kind of out of that race, but 6-3 still not an awful record to end the regular season with. There's still a lot to like about this team. They just didn't play well in this one. It was the solo laners that I think really looked the most outclassed. Wunder was just not good. Rek'Sai's very strong in lane. We've seen that pretty consistently even when this champion loses, but out of lane, she's just not nearly as relevant in terms of being able to take over the game as some of the other like aggressive bruiser tanks that we see in the meta, and Odo very much punished that. Beat Wunder in lane and then nothing really else to do for the Rek'Sai on the map, so certainly not an ideal game from Wunder, who I think has been fine, maybe not exceptional, but fine for most of this year. And then Zviru was the other player that you're really going to point out not having a great game. The Annie felt entirely useless. I'm still low on that champion. I think her impact on the game is just significantly lower than a lot of the other more supportive, engage-oriented mid laners like Talia in the meta right now that I just think are better versions of Annie. I mean, Nico's in that same vein, but the triple mid lane ban here against Team Heretics definitely hit hard because I think the Annie wasn't nearly as relevant. And if you're not going to be willing to play something super aggressive, I think that definitely is going to limit the upside, and that could potentially be an area of attack for other teams going into Heretics in the playoffs. If they can target Zviru, a big reason why I think this team has gotten back on track is the consistency out of the mid lane, not even being like a primary carry, just as somebody who's not losing, somebody who is going neutral in lane and allowing the rest of this team to win games. I still like Flakkid and Trimby. I don't think they played great in this game. Trimby in particular, I think, made a lot of mistakes, but this was fine for Heretics. You're not going to freak out about this. GIANTX is on an absolute roll right now, and they've earned their playoff spot that they did not have secured even remotely going into this week. I did not expect them to come out in the final week of the season and truly just destroy games like they did here, but this is probably best case scenario for them. Then moving on to our second game of day number 3, and man, this one is actually super important and super relevant. Probably the most directly important game of the entire day. It's Rogue taking on SK Gaming, and Rogue is going to pick up their win here. This is massive. This puts them at 3-6. This puts SK at 3-6. Obviously, depending on what happens later in the day with Mad Lions, we could have a multiple team tiebreaker. Same thing with Corp. There are so many possibilities now for tiebreakers at 3-6, but at the very least, we are going to see Rogue and SK at that record, which means we're going to get at least one tiebreaker later today. Whether that's just between these two teams or more is still up for debate, but this is definitely the most intriguing of the outcomes, and I can't believe Rogue actually went out and won this. They looked phenomenal this week. I really actually have to give them a lot of credit because I do think there was a flip switch in their brain coming into week number 3 in terms of how they were playing, because they're playing against some of the playstyles that these players have gotten more comfortable with. I mean, look at Comp and Zoelise down in the bot lane playing Kalista plus Blitzcrank. This is not something you would normally see out of Rogue coming into this week, but it's super worked out for them, and I think the adaptation has very much pushed them forward. Do I think they're a good team? No, I think this is still a bad team, but SK is also a bad team, and you just need to be a good enough bad team to beat the other bad teams, and that's what they were in this game. So let's talk about it. Player of the game for me is pretty obviously going to go to Marcoon once again in the jungle. What a phenomenal week for Marcoon. Again, I've always been a big fan of him, but he played great across both of their wins this week. He was the most important player towards Rogue, in my opinion, very clearly in this week, and he's almost single-handedly keeping their playoff hopes alive going into spring. you just got to be excited for him. You know, you can give a lot of credit to Larson as well because Karma does enable the Viego to kind of get those resets and really start to take over, but this has always been one of his best champions. I think Viego, Wukong was the other one that definitely stood out as like, oh, that's like Marcoon's champion is the Wukong. He's just so good at it in terms of establishing pressure early, more so than other champions as well as just being a huge teamfight menace, but you want somebody who can carry teamfights, who can take over, get those resets, be a force of nature with resources. That's going to be the Viego, and that's going to be Marcoon in that scenario. So really like what he was able to do. I thought he mega gapped Isma, who's just not been good this split, and you're really excited to see that. This certainly is the most interesting outcome. Like I said, Larson was also very important because Karma in general is very important. I think Comp had one of his better games in a while here on the Kalista. Finn was absolutely the better of these two top laners, which we will get into in the later discussion, but you're just excited for Rogue. The fact that they're even in this conversation to begin with, the fact that they went 2-1 this week, the fact that they beat G2 and beat SK, these wins are super important for them, and you know, I kind of hope that they end up getting into playoffs now because this is a great story. But for SK on the other side of this matchup, absolute disaster has struck. I really don't think there is any other way to say this. You started out this split 2-1 against some pretty easy opponents, and since then, you've been inept. You've been one of the worst teams in the entire league. I'm not saying that you are bottom 2 in terms of production, but you're certainly pretty close. Losing to Rogue is pretty bad, and especially with your season on the line or your split on the line here, for some of your players to show up and play the way that they did, it's honestly embarrassing. Like, there really is no other word for it. I would be embarrassed if I was an SK player with the way that I played some of this game, specifically Irrelevant. And I hate to be super harsh about this, but you see a lot of people online talking about how, like, oh, clearly Irrelevant must be tilted. Clearly, you know, he's you know, he's running it down because there's clearly some sort of mental problem there. If that's the case, in a game that almost certainly is going to determine whether or not you make the playoffs, that's a major issue. That is a red flag. That's not a red flag. That is a bright red, neon red, gigantic flag waving in the air. That is like mental boomed into oblivion. If that's the case, get him off of this team. Like, play someone else. That really has to be the answer. If the truth of it is that Irrelevant is so tilted that now, as Cassante, he's just trying to make any play he can. He's walking into 5 members and instantly dying. You can't play him. Your split is on the line. Like, I don't care how good he is. If he's going to show up and play like this, then it's a problem. This was the worst game that anybody played this week on any team. I feel pretty confident in saying that. He did nothing. He ran it down actively. It felt like he was win trading in this. And again, I know I've said it 17 times, but I have to reiterate, their split is on the line, and this is the performance you get out of him. It's embarrassing. Like, it truly is. There is nothing else to say. It felt like he was throwing a temper tantrum on stage. I don't want to just try and announce that that's exactly what was happening because maybe he just had a bad game. But this is so out of character for him that you have to imagine that there's something more going on here. And it's crazy to me. If it was just a bad game, I'm not super surprised. Again, I'm lower on Irrelevant. He has more duds of the game than he does players of the game over the course of this year for SK. I think that's more telling than people would give him credit for. And he's had a bad split. Like, there's really not a lot of good that he's done for this team in spring. And so it's just not a good look. Like, Isma got mega gapped. Niski and Exakick were useless. Doss tried his best to do something in these team fights, but there was nothing to be done. SK just got super outclassed in this one by Rogue of all teams. This is not a good look. At worst, they're going to have a tiebreaker later against the same team that beat them on this day. I know it's a best of 1, but you can't be going into that with this kind of level of confidence. And for Rogue, it's the opposite. You are going in with as much momentum as you've had at any point this year, and then some. It has truly been a great last 2 days for them. I just hope that they're able to capitalize and actually make their way into the playoffs, because that would be a great story. Then moving on to game number 3, our middle game of the final day here, and it's yet another consequential upset as we saw Fnatic taking on Mad Lions Koi, and Mad Lions is going to pick up the win here. Again, moving to 4-5, that locks them in for the playoffs as well. That removes one of the teams that could potentially make the tiebreaker more interesting. K-Corp is still in play, depending on how things go later in the day, obviously, but this is a big win for Mad. You know, confirming your playoff spot is exactly what you want to be, and ending off the split in the way that they did, I feel like it's better than what they were for a majority of the regular season. It's not quite the same hype stop as, you know, GIANTX had over the course of the final day, but still, this was a good series from them, a good showing from them, I should say, in this game, and the reasons that they're able to push themselves forward have stayed relatively consistent, which I think is a positive. And then for Fnatic on the other side, this team is just going to fail to find any sort of consistency. It just kind of is what it is. Their players are inherently a little bit more volatile than maybe your average team would be, and so even if they are ridiculously talented, players like Razork and Humanoid are very talented. Noah are very talented. You know, June's been fine. I don't think he's like ridiculously talented in comparison to the other supports, Esports in the league, but, you know, you have very good players on this team. You should be one of the top teams. You're just never going to get that consistency from game to game, and we saw that a lot over the course of the week, so we'll talk about that. But Supa is going to get player of the game once again here for Mad Lions. A pentakill before 20 minutes on Zeri. Yeah, sign me up for that. That's a pretty good showing. I know he's getting memed around for saying that he's better than Deft and saying he's got the best of everything in terms of the AD carries in Europe, but he's kind of right. Like, and maybe not the Deft part. Like, Deft is probably better than Supa, almost certainly, but, like, I don't know. Is he the best? Is he, like, for sure the best AD carry in Europe? Maybe. Like, he certainly is in the conversation in terms of how he plays. He certainly is a carry in terms of the investment that people can give him. He's been very good for Mad Lions, and he's been a driving force for what this team can play through to win games in the regular season. When players like Merwin are not performing well, when players like Frescowy have not been stepping up and being, like, big hyper carries, been more secondary supportive players in the mid lane, you need to rely on your bot lane to actually do really well, and that's exactly what Mad Lions has done here. The Zeri was awesome. Obviously, a pentakill before 20 minutes is huge, but his positioning is excellent on that champion. He is very good at capitalizing on mistakes. And then Alvaro was also very good on the Renata. You could honestly argue that Alvaro was the most important player of this game. I think Broadcast ended up giving player of the game to Elyoya, who I think also very much deserved it. He had a great week after that horrible game #1 earlier on. I think that there's just a lot to like about how Mad ended off this week. There still is this lingering feeling that they still don't have everything together in the same way that some of the best teams in the league do, but I think that's honestly more of a worry than it is like a definite. This is more so a team that, you know, obviously they stepped up a lot going into the best of stage last split. If they can do that again, if they can improve on what they are now, if you take their current form and just kind of notch it up one slider, one notch, if you will, I think that's a pretty darn good team. I don't know if it's a team that's going to make finals again, because I think the league around them is just straight up better, but beating Fnatic here is a good sign that that's definitely going to be possible, because Fnatic is going to be one of the contenders to go to the finals, and so really nice win for Mad, and a bad loss for Fnatic. Again, you were fighting for first place. This definitely makes that a lot more difficult. Certainly not impossible still. G2 can still lose later on in the day. That's definitely still something that is on the table, but, you know, you're now relying on a G2 loss in order to get that #1 seed, but you just want to see this team start to be more consistent. What I was really high on the team for in winter and at the beginning of spring was it really felt like Razork and Humanoid were finally having that split. Like that year where they were just going to lock in and actually focus and be good on a game-to-game basis, get those leads and be able to translate them in most games and be really consistent in the team fighting stage as well as carries. And so that's really what I was excited about. Then you come into week 3 here and you get some of the worst performances that these players have put out all year long. And this is not the time that you want to see that. This is not the circumstance that you want to see that. Neither of them are going to get dead of the game for me. It's going to go to June. You know, June giveth and June taketh away. We saw, you know, his best game of his career on the Alistair and probably one of his weaker games in the LEC here on the Leona. Leona is a significantly weaker champion, but it's clear that he just wants to play an engager. It doesn't really matter which engager you allow him to have. He's just going to pick the one that is available. Not really an enchanter guy. It's fine. You don't have to be an enchanter guy, but Kaisa Leona is not something that's going to be that strong in the face of like Zeri Renata in this meta. You're just not going to have the same kind of pressure or prio, especially in the mid game, which Zeri just absolutely obliterated. But June's mechanics and decision making were really bad in this game. And then you got Razork and Humanoid completely running it. Specifically Razork, who just got mega gapped by Elyoya in terms of pressure. Again, we've always talked about this with Elyoya. It's very funny how when he loses a game, he spends the rest of the week making up for it by being the best jungler in the league. That's what he did here. He mega gapped a lot of the, you know, the player that I think a lot of people are claiming is one of the best junglers in the league. I know I've seen these tweets from like respected people on my timeline, people in the industry talking about how Razork is constantly disrespected, about how he's never included in the best junglers, you know, conversation, and he's always deserved it. He's always been good enough. Well, these are the games, like the games that he had this week. This is why he's not in that conversation, because this has been the Razork that we've gotten for most of his career. Not to say that he's an awful player. Again, he still had one really good game this week in Fnatic's win, but it's the fluctuation. It's the fact that from a game-to-game basis, you're just getting such different results. That's always been the thing that's held Razork back. That's why it felt so big that he was showing up so much at the beginning of this split and the beginning of this year. But alas, here we are, back to 2023 and 2022 and 2021 Razork, the Razork that we've known from pro play for a long time. So, you know, I'm sad to say it, but this feels like something that's more of like a return to normal rather than kind of a downgrade in terms of his performances. Same thing for Humanoid, who just was not relevant in this game. He's never been great on a game-to-game basis either, and he was an MVP candidate. He was the runner-up in the winter split, so just not a lot to really like here. Oscar was not great in the top lane on the Cassante, even if Merwin really didn't do anything about it. Like, Fnatic didn't look great here. You're hoping that this is just kind of an outlier. Again, I still think they're going to be fine against teams that they are definitely better than, that they can get these early leads against, but when they forfeit that early pressure, when they're not able to just kind of suffocate the enemy team, they're not as good, and that was kind of the example here. here. But for Mad, very important win. It does qualify them for playoffs. No tiebreaker needed. You know, getting in there is half the battle. I think you can step up and really, you know, heat up once you're there, especially if this bot lane and jungle combo are playing well again like they were last split. That's really going to be kind of your tipping point for me, and I think generally they've shown a lot of good things. I'm still not sold that this is going to be a guaranteed like top 4 team going into the playoffs, but at the very least they're closer to that conversation than they were at the end of last week. But then moving on now to our 4th game of day 3. And again, every game from this point onwards matters a lot, but this one more so for the top of the standings rather than the bottom. It's G2 Esports taking on Team Vitality. And Vitality is going to pick up a massive win just as the LEC started to feel a little bit open for G2 to reinsert themselves as the clear #1 team with the only 7-2 record going into playoffs. Everybody lost. Fnatic lost, Team Heretics lost, G2 lost, and Vitality won, which means we've got a 4-way tie for first place in terms of record at 6-3. We'll talk about how that tiebreaker ends up working out at the end of the video when we talk about where they land, but I mean, crazy way for this split to end, huh? Great game from Vitality. I thought they played really excellent. A lot of really great plays coming out from some players that really did need to step up. I think there's a lot of encouraging signs for Vitality right now in terms of their play style. As I've talked about a lot, I know the inconsistency is still there, but to me, it's really one lane that's inconsistent. Like Karzi and Hilly are going to have good games and bad games, but Photon, Douglas, and VTO have been very good, like across the whole split, like irrelevant of what everything else is happening on the map. So credit to them. For G2, like, I would be more concerned if it wasn't G2, but, like, honestly, they weren't very good this week. Like, they did a lot of things that were wrong. They made a lot of dumb decisions, but I think a lot of it is limit testing. I think a lot of it is just, like, the players not trying as hard. Like, they were just bad macro decisions, bad gameplay decisions. It's not necessarily them just getting mechanically outplayed, which I think would have been a bit more concerning, but we'll talk about that when we get into them. Of course, it's time to talk about Vitality. Player of the game to me is going to go to Douglas. I think I very much oscillated between him and VTO in terms of who I was going to give player of the game to, because I think both were truly excellent in this one, but Douglas was just more involved, I think, throughout the early game, which means I lean towards him. This was a pretty big jungle gap. Yike did not play well this week at all, even in their win, and it certainly is something to monitor. I've been mega high on Yike across his entire career. I really do believe in him as the #1 jungler in the LEC, but this week definitely threw a bit of a wrench into that equation in my mind, because he just wasn't all that consistent. He really didn't have a lot of those breakout games. You have to imagine that part of that is just not having a lot of pressure in some of these lanes. Caps lost laning phase every single game this week, which is not normal for him, but, you know, it did affect Yike. And some people may say, like, oh, you know, Yike can't win without Caps winning. That must mean Yike is bad. Junglers can't win without their mid laners winning. It becomes harder. Now, I do think Yike played bad. Like, I'm certainly not trying to sit here and say that he played fine. I don't think he was good here. He's not going to get done of the game. We will talk about that. But Douglas definitely gapped him, and Douglas has improved so much in the spring split. This has been a really nice development. I don't think he was awful in winter. I just don't think he was, like, exceptional either. It was really just kind of a below-average jungler who really wasn't making differences for his team. The team was relying a lot on VTO to create a lot of macro pressure. But Douglas has been significantly better, I would say, this split, which is nice to see. VTO was also great. Just gapped Caps in lane. Like, this was not a close 1v1 matchup. VTO obliterated him, was up like 35 CS or something, and then was significantly more useful in team fights. This is the potential of VTO. He's always had this in him. He's been beating people like Caps for a long time, and people just kind of forgot that he was doing that. This is a former MVP, and so I'm not shocked to see him come out and have a really good game while Caps is not exactly playing the best week of his entire career, so good stuff from him. Karzi didn't die. It's usually a pretty good sign that the game is going well for Vitality, and Photon just beats everybody in the top lane. The Zac was not the move for G2. We will talk about that in a second, but generally just a very good game from Vitality. Very clean, very precise, knowing exactly where you want to put your resources, and a couple other players just really stepping up. I'm really, really excited to see if this team can continue moving in the right direction, but for G2, not the worst loss in the world, again, if only because, first of all, it's to a good team, a genuinely good team in Vitality, who is one of the 5 best teams in Europe right now. It's hard to really rank them because all of them have ridiculous amounts of potential, but Vitality is certainly within that conversation of being a top 2 team. And you just had a couple of performances that were not great. You were taking your Zac in the late game and just throwing him into every single fight and having him die instantly, or having him pop passive instantly and not really being in a better position because of it, just being way too over-aggressive with bad decision-making. You were having Caps lose a lot of pressure in the mid lane. The Viego never really got going. Some really bad play from Yike. And then my dud of the game is going to go to Mickey X. I don't know who is like trying to convince people that Leona is good in Europe, this is the only region playing this champion. So I don't know where they're getting this dark tech from, but Leona is like the 6th best engager right now in the game. When you're going into something like Xayah Rakan and you're playing Leona, you're just never going to be able to keep up with that in the current meta. It's just not worth it. Like, I get the idea behind just having a lot of good CC, but she's not tanky. Her base stats have been significantly nerfed, and so have her cooldowns. And so she's really just not in a state where she's particularly strong in comparison to a lot of the other engagers. I get it, like Nautilus was banned out, Renata was banned out in this game, so you didn't really have a lot of aggressive, things to pick, but you yourself banned out Braum. What were you so scared of? Hilly's Braum? You let him play Rakan instead. He's way better at that. I don't really understand the decision-making at all here for G2. I think this was just generally a very weird draft, and I don't think they executed on it well. Mickey is dud of the game, and again, a lot of the stuff I said earlier the week applies to this as well, where I think if he were on a different team, people would notice a lot more just how bad he's been in 2024. A lot more reminiscent of 2022 than 2023. So, again, maybe there's reason to freak out about G2. Maybe there's reason to be at least a bit concerned that things aren't going their way, but you have to imagine that it's G2, that they're going to figure it out, that this is all leading up into them, going into the best of stage and just kind of turning it back on, mentally flipping themselves back into the game. I imagine that will happen, but nice win for Vitality. At least it shows that they can be competitive, and really there were a couple of plays in this game that were really encouraging that they could compete at a super high level. I don't think a lot of people are seeing this team as potentially top 2, but I think they're very much in that conversation, even if they do have a bit of consistency to gain before they get there. And that's going to bring us to our final main regular season game of the spring split here in the LEC. Of course, we will have tiebreakers already confirmed, but how many? We're going to find out in this game because it's K-Corp taking on Team BDS, and BDS is going to pick up the victory. That means K-Corp ends the split at 2-7. They are officially 10th place, alone by themselves in that spot. No tiebreaker necessary. They are the only team going into tiebreakers that is officially eliminated from the league. They have been last once again. What else is there to say? I mean, this team has failed on every conceivable notion. Everything that they have thrown at the wall has not worked in terms of draft. Everything that they have tried to play out has not worked. Firing their coach has not worked. Roster changes are incoming. We already know this based off of Twitter. There have been reports. I think Kometo actually came out and said it, so there's really no ambiguity left. This is not going to be the K-Corp that we see going into summer, and that is absolutely necessary because the expectations on this org, on this team, were sky high. I mean, people were talking about their scrims as if they were going to be the next G2 in year 1. People were talking about them as if they were going to be Griffin coming into this league and instantly dominating everybody and having a bunch of players that are going to go on to be legends at this level. Like, it's just not. It's not who they were. They're 10th, and they've earned it. They have earned that placement, even if I do think it's a little bit... The conversation's a little bit different, in my opinion, than it should be, but I will talk about that when we get to them. Let's talk about BDS first. At 5-4, they're above 500. I think at certain times in this split, that didn't feel like that was going to happen, so it's nice to see them end up above 500, and I think they played this game very well. They gave a few too many openings, I would say, Nuke in particular, a few too many openings for K-Corp to try to come back in, but for the most part, they were very clean, very consistent. Sheo was going to get player of the game once again here on the Lee Sin. Massive jungle gap in this game. We will talk about that with Bo. Bo has obviously been such a strength for K-Corp, or at least the only person trying to make proactive plays, even if I am significantly lower on him as a player than your average analyst would be, and, than especially your Reddit fan would be. I think Sheo just mega gapped him. There really is no other words to use in this. Bo was not good in this game. Sheo was significantly better. That Lee Sin looked ridiculous to try and play into, and I'm really proud of how he ended up playing. I thought this was a really good game and a really good week from Sheo, a player who I don't want to say I'd written off because I don't think it's fair to say I had written him off, but I'd kind of written him off from being a top tier guy. I had written him off as like a middle tier jungler who was just going to be fine, but was not somebody that you could really rely on in very important games near the top of the standings in order to show up and be able to compete with the best junglers in the LEC, a very strong position at the top of the standings in the LEC, but he had a great week to kind of not prove me wrong, but at least like opened the door for me to be wrong in that instance. So really happy to see him get back more to that 2023 form rather than what he's been in 2024. And then I think the rest of this team was also solid. Adam was good on the Olaf, was definitely better than Cabo on the Jace. Ice and Labrav were very good in this game. When you're playing Zeri into Smolder, you do need to be able to establish that pressure in the mid game. You need to be able to win those skirmishes, and because the Lee Sin and the Nico had so much pressure coming out of the mid side, the middle part of the map, I guess you could say, Ice was actually able to capitalize on that well. This, again, felt much more like a a winter split version of BDS. This was a winter split game from them, almost exactly how they would play last split, where Ice and Labrav were very consistent. Labrav was a big playmaker on somebody that can engage, and then you have Nuke setting up plays for Sheo and Adam really being kind of the X factor on the top side, winning isolated in his own matchup. This was a very good showing for BDS, and they're going into the playoffs feeling good. I don't know if they're feeling great, but they are feeling good, and I think that's better than what they were feeling at the beginning of this split. And then for K-Corp, again, it's just tragic, right? A lot of people are going to look at 2-7, 10th place and be like, this is a disaster. How are they guaranteed worse than Rogue? How are they guaranteed worse than GIANTX? I have some news. Like, that's not necessarily the case. Like, they beat the teams that they were supposed to beat. They beat Rogue. They beat GIANTX. They beat the teams that I think a lot of people thought were going to be the worst teams. They just lost to all the teams they were supposed to lose to. As the number 8 team in my power rankings, they performed almost identical to what we would expect. They lost to teams 1 through 7, and they beat teams 9 and 10. Like, I know it feels bad because you're in last place, but it's not their fault that Rogue and GIANTX came out and had some big upsets and beat teams that they probably weren't supposed to beat, and K-Corp couldn't quite do that. I know it feels bad to say that they had less upside, but that just kind of is what it was over the course of this split. Those other teams got more big wins than K-Corp did, even if K-Corp got the wins they were supposed to get. But Bo is going to get my dud of the series, or dud of the game here, I guess you could say. I don't think Bo has been as good as people think he has been. Again, he's been very important and by far the most important member of K-Corp because he is the only one going out there and trying to be proactive and trying to make plays. But again, I have to reiterate, I know I say this in every game, but he will have one play every game that is like awful, like game-losingly awful, and that's been consistent through his time with Vitality. It was consistent on FPX as well back when he was in China. As somebody who watches a lot of Chinese League of Legends, like, trust me, I've seen a lot of Bo, and he's just never been this player that you're going to get great stuff from a game-to-game basis, from a minute-to-minute basis out of. He's going to have legit unbelievable moments because of his skill, but then, you know, sometimes he's going to give over resources because he's too aggressive, and that's just going to happen every once in a while. When he loses harder than any jungler you've ever seen in your entire life. Like, that's always been Bo, and I would doubt that would ever change, and so that's why you get games like this, where he's playing Vi and he keeps going in and he just keeps dying, because he never stops going out there and trying to make plays. Some might see that as a good thing, some might see that as a bad thing. It's all really up to perception, but, you know, Upset, Targamas, they're a bad bot lane. They do not have any synergy. Upset is so passive, so not doing anything, and Targamas is one of the worst mechanical players in the entire league. Seiken feels completely outclassed, even though he was by far the best player on this team in this game, and Cabochard was never even in the same vicinity as Adam in terms of skill. And so now you're sitting here for K-Corp and you're wondering where it all went wrong. Well, it doesn't really matter where it went wrong. You have to fix this for summer. If you go 10th, that's a disaster. But remember last year, the first year of this new thing, this new kind of format in the LEC, you had a team that went 10th in winter and spring. You had Excel go 10th, and then they got second in the summer split. It's possible to figure things out, turn things around, make changes that make your team better. It is certainly possible to go in that direction. And I think it is possible for K-Corp to figure something out, to pick up a couple of players. You know, players like Kaiser are available. We could potentially be looking at some ERL call-ups in the mid lane or the top lane, or, you know, places like that. The bot lane, I think it's definitely an option. But right now, in their current state, you just have to accept that this team was just not good enough in terms of what their preseason expectations were. And then for BDS, good win. Again, happy to see them win. It doesn't entirely change my opinion. Beating a team like K-Corp doesn't really inspire a ton of confidence because everybody's kind of been able to do that. However, it is at least good to see them do it in a good fashion. I think Sheo playing well and Ice and Labrav playing well are very encouraging. This is still going to be an interesting BDS team, even if I don't think they're as strong as they were in winter. But that's going to bring us now to our 16th game of the week and our tiebreaker. This is for 8th place. It is win or go home for both of these teams here in the spring split. The winner will be moving on, of course, to top 8. The loser will be done. They will be out. So a big game here for both of these teams. It's Rogue taking on SK Gaming. And SK Gaming is going to get the job done. This is a huge win for them. It really is big that they locked in here and actually tried to win the game. They are obviously better than Rogue, and Rogue's problems came out here in full force. The ego checking, the ego of some of the players on this team, which we will get into, I think really came back to bite them. Just the bad decisions. It felt like they were nervous going into this game, but SK showed up. They did what they were supposed to do, and they walked out of here with a win. If they didn't, it would have been pretty much a disaster for them. So congratulations to them for actually going out and being able to do that. Obviously, they needed to do that. So good for them. I still don't think this was a perfect game for them, although I think it was close, and I think the big encouraging factor is that everybody on the team kind of played well. Like, you didn't really make any major errors in this one. Like, maybe DOS was too far forward sometimes, but still, I think the Camille was generally a positive. You know, I thought Niski and Isma were great as a duo, specifically Isma, who I think did a great job of controlling the pacing of this game, not really allowing Marcoon, who had been the driving force for Rogue across this week so far, to get ahead in the same kind of way. And then, you know, player of the game is going to go to Irrelevant. Now, I do want to make the point clear. I still think that this game is getting blown out of proportion when it comes to Irrelevant. I really do find it very funny how Reddit in particular, but Twitter as well, just picks a player that they really like and all of a sudden just like force feeds it down everybody's throat. Like, oh, this is the best player of all time. Oh, a top org needs to pick this player up. I don't think Irrelevant's been this like untamable player over the course of this year. You know, as for me, I think I've ranked as my number 4 top laner in Europe. I think that's probably fair. He's going to beat a lot of the players that are around there, like Wunder. You know, he's better than Oscar Rinnan. You know, he's better than these players that are, you know, he's better than Finn. Like, he's better than these players who are fine, but not exceptional. You know, he's above that tier, but he's not Photon. Like, this guy is not winning every single laning phase in dominant fashion. He's not, you know, getting gold leads no matter what the situation is and winning bad drafts. He's not doing that. He's just a good player in good situations. This is a good draft for SK, and it really set the NAR up for success, and Irrelevant did a good job of capitalizing on that. Those team fights were very successful. They were very clean. Coming in from Irrelevant, when he is given a good opportunity, he does a very good job of making the most of it. I think I'm just pushing back on this idea that he is somehow some game breaker in the top side of the map. He has had a lot of bad games this split, like a lot of bad games this split, and I think people just like selectively forget those because they want a narrative where Irrelevant is very good, and yes, I understand why, but he's good. He's just not, I guess, elite is the word I'm looking for. I don't think he's elite. I think he's good. I think he's very good. It's just, that's where I want to draw the line on him. I know it's kind of a tangent, but there is just so much like Irrelevant, like love online, and I'm glad that it's more positive. Like, I really am glad that there is a more positive aspect to this community, because oftentimes it can just be dragging players down rather than trying to prop players up. And, you know, who am I to criticize that the league has finally found a player that they really like? But I do think he gets a little bit more credit than maybe he deserves. I don't think he would be the solution to like Fnatic's problems. I think he would make them better, but I certainly don't think he's a perfect player to just like slot into every team. So good game, different story. Ismo was very good as well. Again, Niski I thought had a good game. Exekick was solid. SK was just good. They did what they were supposed to do in this game, which was outskill Rogue, a team that they are indeed better than. I still don't trust SK going into playoffs. The fact that they had to get to this tiebreaker in the first place means that I really, really don't trust them, but at least they were able to win it. And for Rogue, you know, the story would have been better, I think, if Rogue had won. Maybe I'm a little biased for saying that, but I think from a narrative perspective, it would have certainly been more interesting. Unfortunately, their players are just not good enough to make that story a reality. Bot lane in particular, I think, really let them down in this game. A lot of people are going to point to how Zoe Elise played some of these fights and just like his roaming, like where he got caught out, just him being in the wrong position at the wrong time and dying for no reason. And I agree, he is going to get dead of the game, but it wasn't just him. Comp taking teleport this game is literally inting. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Against a Maokai, against a Gnar, against a Camille, if you're not taking cleanse, you are literally inting. Like, you are running it down. And you can hear that from the Rogue players. They did a mic check of the draft for this game, and you can hear Comp say, no, I'm not going to go cleanse, I'm going to go teleport. And you can hear Finn and Marcoon, like, arguing, like, are you sure, man? Like, are you sure you can get away with that? Spoiler alert, he could not get away with that. Maokai pressed W, and the Smolder died. And all of a sudden, your win condition, which this entire comp is built around the Smolder, you can no longer play around it. So Comp and Zoe Elise, to me, lost this game. Not to mention the fact that Comp was, like, 2-0 and was, like, way down on stacks at 20 minutes. Like, I don't really know what he was doing, but it was not good. Marcoon never really had the opportunity to play as well. He lost a lot of pressure in the early game, and that was his fault. Isma definitely outplayed him, and Finn definitely got outplayed by Irrelevant, but I really look at the bot lane as the biggest offender in this game, and it just is what it is. For Rogue, I do think you need to make changes. I like Marcoon a lot. You just signed Larson to this big contract. I don't think you can get out of those two, but bot lane's gotta go. Like, I don't know if maybe you run with Zoe Elise because he's so young and he's only played with who, in my opinion, is the worst AD carry in Europe right now, but there is literally no excuse for Comp being on this team, in my opinion, going into summer. I think you have to make that change, but for SK, again, nice win. You're in playoffs. You did it. It was a lot closer than it probably should have been, considering your start and considering what you were in winter, but at the end of the day, getting in is all that matters. Getting into the playoffs and giving yourself that opportunity is all that matters. It's really going to be about what they do from this point onwards, and at least for now, they still have a lot to prove for me. All right, but that is going to do it for my LEC Week 3 overview and analysis video here in the Spring Split, and that's going to do it for the regular season here in Spring. We're moving into the best of 3 stage. 2 teams have officially been eliminated, Rogue in 9th and Karmine Corp in 10th. Obviously disappointing to see those 2 teams go out, but quite frankly, both of them deserved it with how they played for a majority of this split, and all of the teams that made top 8, I think, deserved it. I don't know, SK Gaming's a little bit more on the fringe there, but still, I would say relatively okay weeks from everybody. Of course, up on the screen are the standings, the final standings after the regular season. Fnatic in 1st, Vitality in 2nd, G2 in 3rd, Heretics in 4th, BDS in 5th, GX in 6th, Mad Lions in 7th, and SK at 8th. This is certainly not how I expected things to work out, but up on the screen, you can also see my personal power rankings to the right from number 1 to number 10. You can see how those have changed from last week to this week. There's actually not that many changes because this was the week of upsets. There were so many crazy results that it just was kind of difficult to get an idea as to what was real and what was not. So I'm going off of gut here. This is how I feel for a lot of these teams. G2, I still expect to be the best. Fnatic at 2, Heretics at 3, Vitality at 4, and BDS at 5. I truly feel those are the 5 best clear teams in the LEC right now. Mad Lions a very close 6th, but I do think that there is a gap between top 5 and number 6 for me. GIANTX is going to jump all the way up to number 7. They had a great week, 3-0. They looked really good, and they beat some good teams, especially with teams like SK struggling. I feel like GX is better than them right now, so SK going to drop to 8. Did not think they were going to drop into the bottom 3 this year, but lo and behold, this team is not consistent at all, and then unfortunately, Rogue and K-Corp 9 and 10, K-Corp falling to 10 because they are alone in 10th place. But those are my power rankings. That kind of gives you an idea of the teams that I expect to move on in some of these matchups, but I'm very excited to see how these teams end up getting on. I think it's going to be a really, really good playoffs because a lot of these teams are very close and upsets have been super prevalent in the LEC, but that's going to be it for my standings. It's time to get into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 3. Player of the week for me is going to go to Sheo, the jungler for BDS. BDS had a good final week of the season. Maybe they weren't the flashiest team in the world, but they did everything that they were supposed to do, and Sheo had probably the best week he's had so far in 2024. That's what you want to see. You want to see this team getting better. You want to see a lot of the improvements being made as they continue to go on throughout the split, and that's what Sheo is doing. He's making improvements. He's stepping up his game, and I think generally that's just going to be a positive overall for BDS. But runners up, honorable mentions, Supa, the AD carry for Mad Lions. He was really given a lot of responsibility for MDK over the course of this week, and he showed up. He was given responsibility not only by his own team, but by enemy teams as well, being given a lot of pressure from the opposing junglers, and he really survived and did a good job of being able to still capitalize on champions like Smolder and Zeri as those hyper carries. And then Marcoon. I know people are going to look at the tiebreaker and say that Marcoon maybe shouldn't be on this list, but I'm not counting the tiebreaker just because, you know, it's a tiebreaker. It's an extra game. It shouldn't be fair to count it. Marcoon was really good in 2 of the 3 games that they played in the actual regular season this week, and I really do think he deserves this spot. They were in the tiebreaker almost solely because of how well he played, and you got to give him a lot of credit for that. So Sheo's player of the week, Supa and Marcoon are runners up. Dud of the week, though, actually kind of flip around. It's going to go to Mickey X. Very funny to see like a Rogue player in the runner up for player of the week and a G2 player in the dud of the week, but it was the week of the upsets. This is kind of just how it went, and truly, I do believe Mickey X was the worst player in the league this week. I think there's an argument to be made that it was insert anybody on SK Gaming here. Exakick was certainly somebody that I considered for this. I think Razork was also somebody that I considered for this from another pretty good team who I think had a really rough week, but Mickey X I felt like was the most detrimental. There were a lot of things going wrong with G2, but Mickey had a very bad week, just not playing particularly well. And the reason this concerns me is because he hasn't been playing well all year long. And so to me, he was a pretty clear choice for dud of the week and G2's worst week that they've had so far in 2024. But let me know if you agree or disagree down in the comment section below. I know I took some risks here when it came to player and dud of the week, but I would love to know your thoughts and feedback on that down below. I was definitely more impassioned about some of the arguments I made. So, you know, whether you want to complain that I'm not high enough on irrelevant or whatever you want to complain about in terms of my analysis down in the comments, it's all fair game when it comes to this channel. So I'd love to hear from you guys down there. Of course, if you did enjoy the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit subscribe. We don't only post about the LEC. Of course, the playoffs are coming up for the LEC, but so are the playoffs for every other region. NA is already very deep into their playoffs. We're coming up on finals very shortly for both the NACL and the LCS, and then the LCK and the LPL playoffs kick off next week as well. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports right before MSI, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all